frontier hamlet of Barrow's Edge has called for adventurers, requesting help and promising reward. The request did not include any specifics. The dirt road you travel shows signs of regular use. There are few weeds and fresh grooves show the frequent passage of the wagons. The road winds through moderately forested land. Somewhere up ahead, you hear the sound of battle. Hey everyone, welcome back to DemDMs. I'm Panda Ghost.
I'm Fox Ghost.
And I'm Matt.
And today we're going to be reviewing the 3.5 campaign, Scourge of the Howling Horde. So if everyone's ready, let's slide on in. First up, as referenced by the reading at the beginning there, one of my personal favorite things about this campaign is that it has these read-aloud texts, which is great for new DMs. This is a new DM specific campaign adventure. It's not really a campaign. It's only a couple levels. But yeah, so that's one of my favorite things about this.
And if you haven't realized already, we've talked about this campaign several times, so you can tell we are a little biased towards it, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, if you watched any of our other videos, we mentioned it quite a bit.
Yep.
But it's a good one. But yeah, as Panda Ghost was saying, it even describes it in the very beginning of the book that this is an adventure designed to be run by new DM for new players, to get people into the hobby. It has things like, a checklist before running the adventure, things that you might want to pick up or look at or do before you sit down to play.
Yep.
And it has like some other ideas of, running a campaign in general, right? That might be something that somebody's not as familiar with.
Yep. And I guess at this point, spoiler warning if you want to actually play in this adventure. Although if you're here, you're probably here for DMing reasons. So, but yeah, spoilers up ahead. So jumping right in here, right after you read this this read aloud text that they tell you to, it then leads right into combat, right? No like him and Han at the start. You jump right into combat, or just about, which is
the evergreen goblin ambush at the start of the adventure.
But beats the tavern, if you ask me.
Yes, right. Oh, right. So I guess you've got to know that your players will have known each other prior to the start of this.
Yes, it does describe that at the beginning as well, but yeah, 100%. And it does give you like kind of periodic read aloud text as well, so it's not just describing a location. It kind of takes you through different things that are happening as the players are becoming more engaged in an encounter. So it's quite frequent. Something that they did a lot more in 3.5 and kind of stepped away from in later edition modules, but definitely prevalent here.
Yeah, and the next thing that I really like is, which is shown in the first combat here, is that they give, instead of just telling you how many 8 hit points a monster has, they actually have like little check boxes off for their HP and some other resources too sometimes.
Yeah, and there's even like little notes section for each instance of this goblin, right? Something that you could write down if somebody has, a modifier to their, AC or something like that not all of them have. Which, something that happened a lot in 3.5 is, modifiers that you had to just figure out all the different instances of things and add them all up to come up with whatever your bonus was. A lot of math. But yeah, they do have like separate HP blocks too in this first encounter, so it's even kind of showing maybe one of them is a little bit tougher than the others, and you can describe them that way, when you're, if you wanted to add something.
And they also have a block for tactics as well, instead of just like, oh hey, you have these 3 monsters here.
Yep.
It actually describes how they're going to attack the players. If they retreat, maybe, if they fall under a certain HP threshold or what have you. Will they gang up on one person at a time, or will they kind of spread out? They have things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also kind of gives them like a mood when they start, like, right? Like in this first one, it's talking about how they just had a victory over a foe recently, so they're a little bit more emboldened to act, which is why they might stay to the end of a fight.
Yep.
But then and then the last thing about this encounter, which is true of all the encounters, is obviously 3.5 milestone leveling was not as common in adventures, especially low level adventures, and we see an XP kind of table based off of how many players are playing this adventure, right? So it's a little bit easier for DMs to keep track of XP.
Yeah, one other thing, we could just go on and on and on about the NPC stat blocks here. Like, they even provide loot that would be on these enemies as well throughout the entire encounter, so there's no guesswork, right, with what these enemies would have on them, right?
Yeah, definitely a change from 5th edition.
But moving away from monsters, but still in the realm of NPCs, after you wrap up this first encounter, you interact with a NPC. I believe she is a gnome or a halfling. Halfling named Sten, and they actually give her different motivations and such as well. Like, they tell you, this is like kind of how this NPC is going to be role played, right? And what are her motivations? And it kind of explains that she has this tie to one of her guards who's bleeding out from this previous ambush, right? How she prioritizes helping him. They tell you to kind of play that up a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that this one NPC, who again is ostensibly just a merchant in the story, has their own page in the module describing their different
characteristics,
goals
personality,
and characteristics, and how to role play them and all that stuff. I mean, that is incredibly helpful. Now, they don't do this for every single NPC, but
just the key ones.
Yeah, this is a specific NPC, and to give I mean, this book is only like 30 some pages, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's like
32 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to give up a whole page just for an NPC that's not really that important to the story is interesting.
Yep.
And she's kind of important character.
She's not the quest giver or anything of that nature. She's just somebody they meet on the road, and then they escort them back to town, and through that act possibly get certain boons at their store.
And that's another thing. Is a part of the reward is not just gold value. A lot of time you see just like gold value or magic items for rewards for doing quests. In here, Sten is able to give you quite a hefty reward at first level, which is 100 store credits. GP, right. 100 GP worth of store credits for each character. That's a crap ton of gold, but it only applies to her store. So, like,
which in the effect of this adventure, they're only going to be in the one village. So gold is not necessarily of value to the players,
right?
But some means of garnering goods and things like that would be.
Right, exactly. It helps the party specifically for this adventure as a reward, and doesn't, you don't have to worry about giving them too much gold later down the road because because later down the road they might be able to buy ridiculous shit. And here it's limiting it only to this general goods store, right?
But it helps tie the players to this location.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gives them a vested interest.
Yeah, it gives them a face to the otherwise unknown location that they're potentially going to be helping.
Yep.
Right. And then we have some more, interesting encounters between picking up this NPC and getting back to the town. And what's really cool about this is we're seeing monsters with, class levels in essence, or to a lesser extent. In the case of Galar the Goblin Druid and his wolf companion, you're kind of seeing, a different side of goblins than just the, sneak up and hit you with a dagger or a spear kind of combat, right? You're
Right.
giving some variance to that monster, but still keeping it as a goblin.
Right,
You know?
exactly.
And then moving right along, we finally get to the town, Barrow's Edge, the hamlet, rather.
Yep.
And I would say there are 3 to 4 pages just involving the village.
Yep.
Of different locations, different NPCs. You can like change it in here to have different deities being worshipped in the temple that's in the town. To maybe ingratiate one of your players a little bit easier.
Yep.
And you're giving them access to NPCs that can cast spells for them as a
Right.
means of providing certain things,
Yeah,
which is really cool.
There's a cleric at the temple, as well as there's a magic shop where. So depending on if you need some arcane versus some divine magic to be cast for your party, they have options there.
Yep.
Yeah. And then, it goes into, getting this job described to them, this need for adventurers to help kind of assess what's going on with these recent attacks of goblins that have become more and more violent and, seemingly unprovoked. And goes through different ways to get the players involved. If it's not just they're going to do it for the sake of good, people being hurt, maybe there's a monetary value, maybe there's some other reason why they want these goblins taken care of. So it gives you a couple different like hooks, which is nice.
It also gives you a couple
And that's
different options for how your party wants to resolve. I mean, it gives 2 options, but resolve the issue of finding the goblin hideout, right?
Yeah.
It lists off if the players want to keep a prisoner and if they want to track the, and it gives options for both of those kind of things and like different kind of DCs that the party would need to roll in order to successfully find the goblin hideout based off of one of these 2 options.
Yeah, I mean, this is very, at least that portion of it, very reminiscent of, Lost Mines of Phandelver for people that are familiar. I mean, this is a very, similar start with a goblin ambush where there's goblins hiding out nearby and you need to go track them down somehow and deal with that, right? I think the difference here is, really the town, between the 2 of them, right? You have Phandalin that's a little bit more almost Western feeling, if that makes sense. Whereas Barrow's Edge feels medieval fantasy kind of vibe.
I think that does it for the town, the first half of this adventure. Going into the second half, actually finding the goblin hideout of the Scourge.
Howling Horde.
Just like any campaign you should be doing, you should be reading ahead, right? They do have like hidden traps and stuff that you might miss if you're just going page by page, right? You should really take the time and read through.
Yeah, I remember one of the first times I ran this campaign, I forgot that there was a trapped doorway. I just completely forgot about it. So the way it's set up is there's multiple directions that the players could go. So you kind of got to read everything in the book beforehand.
Yeah.
Because one person might go one way, but sometimes people like going off on their own. So,
Right. And one of these things, when we're talking about reading the adventure, I mean, this, back in 3.5, and especially evident in this adventure, they had, the encounter maps, full pages of, exactly what we're talking about in the previous sections, tactics, stat blocks, different parts of the terrain that might be different are heavily described. And, there's a legend for each room, if you will, depicting where NPCs are going to start, and where, certain traps or such that you're talking about, as well as, somewhat of like a idea of if noise is made in this room, these 2 rooms react.
I was just about to bring that up.
Yeah, and that it says it in kind of the description of this overall cave system earlier on of like this is a living lair, right? just because your players stop to take a rest or leave for an hour does not mean that the NPCs just stay stagnant. They move around, they fortify, and while that might seem, very matter of fact for, veteran DMs, for new DMs, this is a really something that they need to be aware of, if their players are a little bit more cautious and, might be dipping their toes into the dungeon and leaving for a day or something.
Right.
So it's just nice that they're giving these kind of tools and flat out saying like these are the things that you can do. If this room is having a fight in it, then these two rooms over here are going to move, and maybe they'll stay in the room that they're in, but they'll be prepared, right? There won't be a chance of sneaking up on them,
Right.
or they'll come in to help, right?
Right. And one thing, like Matt mentioned, there are battle maps for each room, but at the back of the book there is a full, dungeon map, a one-page dungeon map, and I would recommend, using that to mark where things are. Like if there's like a trap on a door, put a sticky note on the map so you know that, oh hey, there's a trap right here, right? That you got to remember about. And things of that nature.
Yeah, please do not mark in the book. I think this might go without saying, but young Matt, who was very dumb, did this for some books, and he now regrets it. So learn from my mistakes. But yes, very useful, in general. I mean, a lot of descriptions for 5th edition modules are just the name of the monster and, that's about it, right? And that's just, it's so night and day in terms of helping the DM run something. And then you have in this dungeon, areas that are not encounters but are still statted out, right? Like the shrine to Maglubiat, the goblin god, right? It is a fully statted out location like the others. There's no combat there, but there's a challenge, there's a puzzle possibly, with some hidden treasure and different things that you can do in that room, which makes it a good place to rest potentially if you're able to stave off the unhallow effect that is currently taking place.
Throughout this book, there are places where it will grant XP for non-combat encounters. Something I haven't seen too much of in 5e, if at all.
I feel like 5th edition generally kind of assumes milestone leveling.
Yeah, that's true.
For a lot of their adventures. Not to say that's a bad way to do it. I use milestone leveling more often than I use XP. But like for, a new DM who really doesn't know, how to run a game, and leveling up and all that stuff, it really kind of gives them an ease of like, okay, they've reached the cap that they need. Let me go, deal with leveling them up, whenever they have a rest or something.
Yeah.
This is also to say that CR in 3.5 was a little bit more helpful.
Yeah, it was actually accurate. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, throughout this adventure, you're fighting mostly goblins, hobgoblins, and a bugbear. And
Big
then you
Bronk.
Big
Bronk. You eventually round this out with a fight against a black dragon wormling, or a young black dragon.
Who's a Bobby?
Yeah, he very, medium-sized dragon. But, I mean, this was the first adventure I ever ran. And it was, I think, the most inherent D&D feeling adventure that I've run since. You know what I mean? Like, this feels like, when I think of, fantasy D&D, this is definitely, where my mind goes. And I think, just having that feeling is something you want to do in an intro adventure, right?
Yeah, it's got fights, it's got investigation, it's got infiltration, it's got magic, it's got a dragon.
Yeah.
And it's in a dungeon.
And it's in a dungeon, right, exactly.
Hence Dungeons and Dragons.
It's quintessential D&D.
Yep.
I mean, comparing this to something like, the Essentials kit, it's night and day, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the feel of them.
And I will say, you know, just because this is 3.5, a lot of the stat blocks, you know, are similar enough to their 5th edition counterparts. You could probably just drop in, you know, the goblin stats for each of these goblins from 5th edition. So you could probably do this with 5e2. I don't see why you can't.
Yeah. And I also like that this adventure, after, you know, it's completed, gives some tips on what to do next.
Yep.
Right? You're a new DM. You really like this adventure. Where do I go next? Now, in my case, I went right from Scourge of the Howling Horde into Shattered Gates of Slaughterguard. But it even gives, you know, an option of just continuing this adventure. You know, if for whatever reason the dragon was able to escape, which it does try to do, it wants to preserve its life. It can come back a later adventure and attack the people of Barrow's Edge again because they've, you know, destroyed its lair.
Right.
And tougher this time too.
Yes, exactly. And one last thing that I want to mention, you guys can maybe talk about something else that you have, but the fact that this adventure comes with a mail-in survey that is in the module, I mean, goes to show that at one point, WotC cared about its product. Right. And what people thought of them, you know, and that I think is something that, you know, they could, I mean, they are doing surveys for, you know, the new playtest packets that are coming out. You know, I think they could do that for some of the adventures that they've tried out, you know, the anthology things, to see if people even like those, you know, and if they have fun with them, or to how to make them better. Right. You know, and then, you know, I think just the artwork in here is superb, you know, black and white art, but still so D&D.
Yeah. It's just a very well put together book in general.
Yep. Just a lot of attention to detail.
Yeah. And it's 32 pages, right? I mean, a lot of the adventures now are, you know, 1st to 15th campaigns that are, you know, 100 to 200 page books. You know, come out with more of these, please.
Yeah.
You know, short little magazine style, you know, adventures.
A newer group, I think the first time we ran it, I think it took us 2 nights to run it.
Yeah, and when I ran it for the first time, it took my group 2 nights to run as well.
Yeah, I think usually you get around to like Big Bronx Room, and that's about where the first night ends.
Oh, you guys got further than my group did. They got in, and that was it.
Oh, yeah,
no. I mean, it also depends, obviously, how long you're in the town, right?
Right, exactly.
You know, I think when we ran it the first time, you know, Fox and I tried to run it, and then people didn't show up for our first ever game of D&D, and then people finally showed up for the second run around. And I think we got through the town pretty quickly, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I think there was just some like items that people were purchasing. That was about it.
Yeah, I wish I was a part of your group back then.
Yeah, we've said this ad nauseum. I think you know, everyone that's watched our channel or watched any of our videos knows that we're lovers of 3.5 for back in the day, for I think good reasons, and then sometimes just pure nostalgia.
We did try and go back at one point to 3.5, and we were like, oh god, all the math.
Yeah, it is a very stark contrast.
Yeah.
But I think there are some things that 3.5 did very well outside of that, you know, and how they formatted certain things that 5th edition could learn from. You know, and you know, when we, you know, shout out to our adventure writing series. I think our plan for when we do our adventure writing series is to maybe run our encounters more so the 3.5 way of how to stat them out and, you know, call out tactics and, you know, different things of that nature, to make it a little bit more DM friendly. Because, you know, yes, this was an intro adventure, but they did this in almost every adventure that came out in 3.5. You know, and some earlier editions as well. So it'd just be nice to get back to that. All right.
Well, I think that just about does it for us. Be sure to smite that like button, subscribe, and to sneak attack that notification bell. But until then, join us next time when we slide into DemDMs. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Peace.